Hello everyone and welcome to our second demonstration for the Golden Bee Community Project. Today we are bodybuilding and we are creating with yellow fabrics for our bee abdomen, thorax and head. Joining me today is Theresa from Sewn Together. Welcome.
Thank you.
She has very generously given us a special design for us to create our bodies, so I look forward to showing you that with her shortly. In the meantime, I've received tons of flowers. I shouldn't say tons, I need tons. I've got a few flowers that have been donated already. So thanks very much for your fabulous work. The wreath is going to look amazing. Keep them coming in. Also, don't forget to create more freestanding lace so I can use that on the wings. So the elements are coming together for our bee, and today is no exception. We are working on the body. The design you've given us, Theresa, is a hexagon, and it's a digital template, which
That's
is
right.
something completely different to what we've been used to as far as hexagons go. Tell me why this is so special. I think you said to me it's English paper piecing without the papers, which is my kind of piecing.
Not only is it English paper piecing without the papers, it's also stitched on your sewing machine. So we are going to be able to get the look of traditional English paper piecing because it's been so popular, and lockdown has certainly driven a resurgence of hexagons. Traditionally, you would have your paper cut, and I know that sometimes people cut them from old magazines or pamphlets that you receive in the mail, or you can buy pre-cut ones.
I have a friend actually who has a quilt that's very, very old, but she has got, I think the magazines are from the 70s or something. She keeps pulling them out and reading them, but she's cut them all by hand.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've got a way for you to do it a whole lot quicker and much more accurate. So traditionally what you would do when you're doing your English paper piecing is you would have your paper, you'd cut your fabric out, and then you have to baste your fabric around your template shape.
So you would do that by hand?
By hand?
Yep.
Or you could use a water-soluble glue. So messy glue, bad idea for me. So you'd have them all basted. Once you've got them all basted, then you can start stitching them together. So there's quite a lot of preparation work. We're going to take out a lot of these
So
steps.
then once they're together, you then stitch by hand?
That's right, you stitch them by hand. Once it's stitched together, you've then got to go and take all those papers out. So this method with the pre-preparation is really only suitable to be stitched by hand.
So when we talked about the golden bee, you said to me, hey Rachel, I've got a great idea to make it faster, because I said, you know, my bee dimensions, so I've measured the golden bee body, and the abdomen 16 inches by 6.5, thorax is 13 by 14, and the head is at 11.5 by 4. So that's going to use a few hexes, right?
Absolutely.
So that's quite a bit of cutting that I need to do, which you're making it simple for me.
I'm going to make it really simple for you.
And so the customers have access to this design?
That's right.
Great. So on our webpage, you can download this digital hexagon. What size is it?
It's a 1.5 inch hexagon. Oh, sorry, it's a 1 inch hexagon. So when we measure our hexagons, we measure along the side of the hexagon, not through the middle from point to point. Paper crafters, you would be the ones who would measure from point to point, but we're talking about the side measurement of our hexagon. So it's 1 inch hexie.
So what do the viewers need to be able to create one of these?
We're going to do it the super easy way. We're going to use our ScanNCut DX model. We're going to use the rotary blade, which is perfect for cutting fabric. Of course, we need some fabric. We've got yellow fabrics in a few different varieties because we're doing the bee. And we are also going to use the little water-soluble pen that comes with your ScanNCut model. So we just pop that in there.
I noticed today we're using the standard mat, but you could use the fabric mat as well if you wanted to.
That's correct, I use both.
And you've got the fabric face down.
Got the fabric right side to the mat, wrong side up, because we're going to do all our drawing on the back so that we can stitch on the drawn line on our sewing machine.
Great. What tools do you need? You've got the brayers used for pressing the fabric down.
That's right. You need to make sure that the fabric is well adhered to your mat. We don't want it moving and we don't want any bubbles in our fabric. So we just give it a little rub over with the brayer and it sticks to our standard mat really well. We need a little scraper here to be able to lift our fabric shapes off at the end. And it's a good idea to have a little pair of fabric snips with you, or thread snips. Occasionally you do get a thread that doesn't quite cut through. So if it's a little bit of a thicker thread in the fabric, it doesn't always cut.
Great.
So that's it. And of course the digital design.
Of course, which we've already loaded onto our USB. So let's start drawing and cutting.
That's it. Let's go.
So it looks like it's finished, Theresa.
It is. How quick was that?
That was really quick.
Super, and we've got 6 hexagons ready to go. So I'm just going to unload the mat, pop it down here.
So I was a bit worried when I was looking at it, thinking, oh, some of them have lifted slightly. Is that a problem?
Most of the time it's not a problem. So this fabric that we're using is actually quite stretchy. It's quite a soft and light fabric, but you might find from time to time that some fabrics will have a thicker thread through them and so they may not cut through. That's why you need your little pair of thread snips with you, and you can just snip that thread and away you go. Of course, if the fabric does move, maybe it's time to clean your mat. So
sometimes it loses its stickiness, so you have to get a new mat.
You don't give it a clean. So after every session of working with your ScanNCut, don't forget to give your mat a good clean down with an alcohol-free wipe.
And that will take the fabric fibres off.
That's right.
Okay, show me what you've got here.
Okay, let's take these little diamond shapes out of the centre here and start lifting up our shapes.
So we've got half a dozen hexes cut fairly quickly and they look beautiful.
This is so much quicker.
Take this.
There we go.
Just take this from you. Oh, and that's we should show them. That's what left. So we could have cut down here as well.
That's right. What I would do is I would just trim my excess fabric off the top, move it along, and we can cut at least another 6 hexes out of there.
Great.
Great. It's
Okay.
also a great way of using up your scraps because you can pop 1 hexie on each scrap of fabric.
So these are the beautiful drawn lines that you have designed with the digital template.
Okay, lots
And this
of
is
them.
what makes these unique, right?
Absolutely. We have done all our preparation work in just a few seconds on the ScanNCut. No gluing, no papers to put in, no papers to remove at the end, and we can stitch them by machine.
Let's set up and start stitching.
Let's do it.
Okay, Theresa, so we've got the sewing machine set up. We are using the Brother NV50S. What other tools do you need to piece these hexes together?
Our requirements are quite simple. So we need a thread and a bobbin that matches our fabric. We have some glass-headed pins. We have a pair of thread snips, and we have got our wool pressing mat and mini iron set up to press as we go.
Why do you use the glass-headed pins?
Because I'm a little bit prone to bumping them with the iron. And also you generally find that your glass-headed pins are a better quality pin, so they glide through your fabric a little bit better. One other important thing that we didn't mention, we need to use the open toe applique foot on your machine. This may not come as a standard accessory with your machine.
But it is available, and it's great because you can see where you're driving.
That's right, that's what we need to do.
Let's have a look at how these guys go together.
It's really simple. We're going to place our 2 pieces. This one, you notice, has a little complication. Rachel actually cut these out ahead of time, and word of warning.
I used the disappearing pen.
And so, of course, it's disappeared. So don't use the purple disappearing pen, that air erasable pen that comes with your ScanNCut.
Unless you're going to stitch straight away.
That's right. But don't do it if it's raining.
I was
they
having a
dissipate
play.
really quickly.
Yeah, I was having a play and I didn't stitch straight away, so my markings have disappeared.
So what we've got is ours that we used the water-soluble pen. We're going to place them right sides together. Let me get rid of those scissors. And we're going to pin through our alignment points on our corners. So we're going to pop a pin through that intersecting line on the front and make sure that it lines up with the same intersecting line on the back. Let's move those pins out of the way as well. Just push our fabrics together so that our pin is standing straight up. It means that our fabric is directly on top of each other. And just push our pin in place. And we're going to do the same at the other end of our row of stitching. Make sure that it all lines up.
So do you often find you have to piece both those together to check those intersecting points?
Yes,
Okay.
you do. You do. You need to make sure accuracy is really important with this.
And so if you were at home, you would do the whole lot. You'd pin the whole lot and maybe twos, or would you just do it like this and then stitch? What's your
No,
preference?
I would actually pin and stitch one seam at a time and then lay it back where it needed to be, because if I pinned a whole series of them, I would get lost. I need to do it step by step and I can just keep adding on. It's not like rotary cutting where you need to work in a particular series of step by step. What we can do is we can stitch any seam at any point at any time, because all we're stitching is from pin to pin. We're not stitching in our seam allowances, and so it really doesn't matter what order we stitch them in.
So let's stitch.
Let's stitch. So the next step is we leave our pins in place and we're going to slide it under the machine. We're going to wind the needle down with that pin still in place, and we're going to wind the needle down so it's as close to the pin as possible on our blue marked stitching line.
And did you use any particular stitch length, or did you just keep it at a standard length?
No, I have used a shorter stitch length. I've gone down to about 1.8. So you can, some machines you will need to go to 1.5 because 2 is still a little bit too long. And once I've got the needle in place holding my fabric, I can then take the pin out.
So the shorter stitch length makes it a stronger seam for this, doesn't it?
It does make it a stronger seam, but we are also stitching from dot to dot. So the shorter stitch length means that it's a little bit more accurate and you're able to finish on a specific point rather than having a big stitch. We don't want any stitches past the intersection of our lines. That makes it hard when we come to sew the next seam. So I have got my dot ready, my needle down, ready to start stitching. I'm going to just stitch 2 or 3 stitches, and then I'm going to reverse back 1 or 2 stitches, and I'm going to use my needle down feature. Okay, I'm going to stitch on the blue drawn line. Now it's much easier to stitch sitting down, I can assure you.
Unless you're my height, in which case I find it quite easy and comfortable.
I'm stitching as close as possible as I can to that remaining pin, and then I slide it out. I've got 1 more stitch to do, and then I'm going to reverse a couple of stitches. And for those of you that have a thread cutter, this will make your life so much easier. I'm going to just slide that out, clip my threads, top and bottom. Let's get rid of that one as well.
So on the overhead camera you can see, it's a perfect seam.
Perfect seam, just stitching on the line. So we don't worry about what size our seam allowance is. We've got stitching lines, and that's what's going to make sure that it's perfect. I've got a little thread tangle under there.
So would you normally press that now, or would you finger press it?
I would choose as I was going along. So most of the time I would probably finger press it, and then I would pop it back where it needs to be, and then you can choose which seam you would like to sew next. So you might like to sew that diamond on, or you may choose to sew across in a row. But every time that you stitch, you're only stitching from alignment point to alignment point. You're not stitching continuous rows of stitching. So it's dot to dot, and then we stop and leave our seam allowances unstitched. That's really important.
So can we stitch one more on, Theresa, with,
Sure.
let's say, do we call this a Y seam? Is that
It
what
is a Y seam.
Yeah,
Yep.
let's try a Y seam.
Okay, a Y seam, when you've got your stitching lines, is really easy to do. So right side's facing up, we're going to stitch these two together to start with. We place them right sides together and we pin, I call this my destination, so we pin where we're stitching to.
And you know, just because I'm curious, why is it called a Y seam?
Because you'll see once we've stitched it that it is the shape of the letter Y.
Aha.
And there are lots of people who aren't brave to tackle a Y seam, but this will make your life easy. Again, our alignment point. If you had a bigger shape, you'll notice that there's also a marking that's halfway. So you can use that secondary point to match your dots partway through. Again, I just slide the needle, turn the needle down before I take that pin out. Press the foot down, a couple of stitches and reverse. Then I stitch on the drawn line. If you feel that it's a little difficult to manipulate your fabric, you can use your a purple thing, or a stylus, or a third finger,
A stiletto.
a stiletto. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're stitching really close to that second pin. One more stitch.
So stitching at a slower speed is more
Absolutely.
beneficial too. So
Even if you stitch at a slower speed, it's still quicker than rushing it and having to unpick. So I'm going to pull those out, clip on my threads, and you can see I've just stitched from dot to dot on the line. So that's 2/3 of our Y seam. Then to stitch the third section, I would put it right sides together. But what I would do this time is I would actually turn it upside down and I would stitch from there to there. I would stitch towards the bulk. So rather than stitching from here out, stitch where it's flatter and thinner and stitch towards the bulk. Again, make sure you pin, don't skip the pinning section. No matter how confident you feel, don't skip the pinning. It is important.
because as you said before, it's not the seam size, it's actually the shape of the hexagon is the blue drawn mark, and that is the stitching line. This is fantastic, I'm loving it. Certainly make it easier for bodybuilding the hexagons for my head, thorax and abdomen.
And for those of you that love the look of creating a hexagon style or English paper pieced quilt, but really don't like the idea of hand piecing or hand stitching.
That's me, because I haven't been able to hand piece for a long time.
Or can't hand piece. This allows you to create that same effect. Got one more stitch and I'm going to reverse.
So you're reversing at the beginning and end for every single seam?
That's correct. You need to do a reverse at the beginning and the end. When you're rotary cutting and stitching with a 1/4 inch seam foot, traditionally you would stitch across your seams and that would lock them in place. But we're not doing that. We've got independent seams all the way through.
Yep.
So we need to make sure that they're locked.
Absolutely makes sense.
So there's our
And there's our Y.
There's our Y.
Woohoo! I
Why?
get it.
Why didn't we think of this earlier?
Wow, this is really exciting. So
I'm going to just trim this
trim
little
the-
thread off and give you one other little suggestion. So what we're going to do is we're going to pinwheel the seam. So we are going to have all of our seams going in the same direction. So this seam goes that way. I'm going to just finger press that in place. There we go.
and it will just flatten down the centre.
That's correct. Now, one other advantage of stitching like this, as opposed to English paper piecing, is that you'll notice that our seam allowances are actually on the same side. So our seam allowances aren't automatically pressed open, which means that if we choose to, we can stitch in the ditch. With traditional English paper piecing, you can't stitch in the ditch because your seams are automatically pressed open.
Well, that's great. Do you know what I want to do now? I want to make hexes, but also let's use what we've cut here. That's not all sewn together, but let's audition them on the bee. I'm going to go and grab her and put her on the table.
Let's have a look.
Yeah. So Theresa, I've pulled out the golden bee. You can see we have some of our elements. We've got our flowers here. None of it's stitched because we're just auditioning how this is going to work, but they're all coming together. And now we've got our third element for bodybuilding, which is our hexagons. So there's a bit of cutting and stitching still to do.
That's right.
But the vision is really producing a completed body part like this. Obviously there'll be a whole lot of different colours, and through these stripes here I will place hexagons along here until it's completely covered. Would you cut these parts off? We'll obviously add some. It's going to be on a bit of a curve because the bee is slightly curved, so we've got some other elements to add.
So I would make a panel that's larger than your applique piece, and then because we've got no stabilisers or anything underneath our fabric, you can simply tuck the edges under that are in the road and stitch in place. Maybe even glue tack it in place, so a little bit of water soluble glue pen, and then your favourite machine stitch to hold it in place.
Sounds great. So still got some cutting and stitching to do, which we will continue. The next step is I'm going to create for the black stripes here, so you can see I've got them marked, and here, take these off. We're going to use quilted fabric, so I'm going to quilt with my walking foot and in my embroidery machine. So that's up next. We are continuing to body build for the golden bee, and I'm going to show you how to pre-quilt a piece of black fabric that will eventually become the black stripes on the bee's abdomen. One of the things I love about my embroidery machine is that I can quilt. Now that might surprise you, but I've been using an embroidery machine to quilt for a long time. The reason I love it so much is it allows me to use designs and shapes that I wouldn't be able to achieve doing free motion quilting. And you know, I really, really love the effect that it gives. The other thing is that the hard work is done by the embroidery machine, as the actual embroidery hoop takes all the weight and the pressure off my shoulders and is all on the machine. So that's really fantastic. The products that I've used today for quilting is wool batting, black fabric. I've used a fat quarter. I'm marking my fabric with the Clover water soluble pencil. My thread choice is Hemingworth Classic Black because I want it to blend in, I don't want it to stand out. And so I'm using black bobbin thread as well. I'm using a TNC 7511 needle. I will need my 5x7 hoop, so that's the hoop I'm using with the template. I will need that for this, for the quilting. My Kimberbell paper tape. I am using Clear Blue Tiles quilting system because it gives me the perfect template for working and lining up my quilting. And then I'm going to show you how to do this with an embroidery, I'm going to show you how to do this with your sewing machine if you don't have an embroidery machine. And that is about choosing a funky stitch that you'll get a nice textural effect on your fabric. And so if you don't have an embroidery machine, you can use your sewing machine, you can use a dynamic foot, a walking foot, or your move it foot, and fabric and batting, just as we did with the machine embroidery. So let me clear the table and we'll start marking. So when using your embroidery machine to quilt, there are some differences that you need to understand, and also a little pre-planning is required. So the first thing is your batting and fabric should be larger than the size that you want quilted. So for example, I've measured the bee's abdomen, and the widest part that I need to quilt is 16 inches by 4 inches. So I know that this fat quarter is 18 inches by 20. So this is going to be big enough for a couple of stripes on the abdomen. I need 5 stripes in total, so I'm actually going to be quilting 2 pieces of black for the whole of the bee's abdomen, and then I'm just going to set it aside and we'll cut these down later when we start constructing the bee. The other thing is you can see that my batting is way wider than the fabric. Now this is so that you have room to quilt on the edge. If this tile goes over here, you need to be able to, you need to hoop on the edge. You need to be able to hoop past the fabric and have something for the hoop to grip onto. And that is why you should try and have, I usually say minimum of 4 inches all the way around. I'm using 2 types of marking pencils for marking this, and that is because it's obviously black and black friction pen won't show up. But I do need to mark the top of my tile up here off. So I'm using my black friction pen for that, and then I'll use the white pen. With the Kimberbell clear blue tile system, they mark from the centre and move down and across. I have found that that's really effective. Today I'm going to mark and stitch down and then go this way, because that is how I want my design to look when it's pre-quilted. So you do have to do some mental pre-planning for how you're going to do it. So to mark the quilt, I'm going to take my black friction pen. You can't really see this on the tile, but there is a pale grey grid on the tile that is 1 inch marked, and this allows me to keep the tile straight. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just test that I've chosen the right size tile first, and this is important. So to do that, I'll put my finger here, 1, 2, so I'm going to have 3 hoopings. That's probably not going to be enough batting on this side. So let me see if I start from here and just work backwards. Just need enough to hoop. 1, 2, I'm just really figuring out where I'm going to start. So it's going to be here. So then I'm going to mark the top, 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 and this is so that I can join it easily. I'm going to now use my white pen because I need to be able to see it. I do mark all these corners and the arrow, the dot, and the cross. And you can put 5 by 7 here if you think you aren't going to get it done in one stitching session. And if you put 5 by 7, you've got the idea of you'll remember which tile you've used. Now there's a couple of schools of thoughts. We could hoop this and then stitch, but I actually like to do as many markings as I can. So you can see I am going down and going to continue marking to the bottom, top, sides, and I'll continue to do this till the whole piece of fabric is covered, and then we'll stitch. So here again I need to grab my friction pen and mark this down here. Now you notice the batting will be stitched and there's no fabric. That is just what naturally happens when you are quilting, and that's why again we have the excess. Then I'm going to move to the right and using my 1 inch grid again and making sure that's aligned and putting this tile next to these markings. I'm going to mark once again and just changing my pencil. And you'll do this until you have the whole piece of fabric completely covered in markings. And what happens is when we start stitching, we actually line up with the crosshairs here. So the center point gives you the placement of where you're going to start. The arrow is the direction in which the design goes, which is really important. Okay. One more. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to start quilting. Pop these back on. Just set these aside. Now the hoop, as I said earlier, we are using the template grid, which is really important for lining up. The other thing I've done, which is different, is I have actually put double-sided sticky tape on the back of the top of this hoop. Not the inside, which we normally do, but just the back. And that is so that once I have the grid, which is what I'm going to use now to line up, once I have that positioned there, then I know that this is where my hoop needs to go. So I can actually place that on here. It gives me perfect alignment, and it will hold the fabric and the batting while I get the back in place. So this is why it's critical to use your templates. The other thing I do is I do loosen my hoop quite a lot so that I can see how much it needs to be loosened or tightened once I have the back and the inner hoop pushed together. And this is a feel, and obviously it's a little harder for me on film because I'm working away from my body, but just slots in like that. You can see pretty much that that is aligned perfectly. Now I can finger tighten the hoop up, make sure that it's got enough grip, and then I'll have another look. My design's loaded and we're ready to stitch. Okay, so there's a couple of things I didn't mention at the beginning which were really important. The first one is you should always check your presser foot height. So I did have to stop and make my presser foot higher. I think I went to 1.2, but you need to check it for your own machine. And that is because it's a quilt sandwich and it's high, the batting is lofted. The other thing is you can see that I have put tape at the top. And that is because I didn't want the embroidery foot to catch on this edge when it was coming back with its swirl. And you will need to do that. I don't do it along the whole top. As I hoop and quilt, I do it as I go and go, yep, I need to tape along here, and often I'll just stop and tape. And I used the Stellia has a red location light, and I used that to line up my dot here, and so that was fabulous. So then the next step is we unhoop and we move the hoop down. We take this off. You can see it's slightly sticky. Again, using the same method, this is open. I shall get my template on top of my hoop. Line those crosshairs up again perfectly. And I'm also making sure, just so you can see my eyes here, 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 and when I mark, this will be here as well. I press that down firmly, and I will put the inner hoop in the outer hoop, just like that. And I'm still checking that the alignment is still there. I'm going to tighten the hoop, and then we're going to go again. I'm going to continue this until the whole fabric is quilted. remove the template, and I'll check that alignment again every single time with quilting. The beauty of the clear blue tiles is it keeps the designs are proportional, so when you're stitching them, it just looks like I have created one whole piece of fabric. The designs are perfectly proportioned and they stitch out evenly. Let me put my needle down to check. Yep, and it's perfect. So I just press start and off we go again. My second design has just finished stitching, and I'm going to carry on and finish the whole of this fat quarter. I want you to show that this is the other one I had been working on. It's almost finished as well, so I've got a little bit of stitching, but I'm just completing the process so you can see I have how it's puffed up beautifully, which is going to be great for the abdomen when I cut out my shapes on here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more hoopings for this one to go and a whole lot here. But now I'm going to show you how to create a great textured effect using your sewing machine and a walking foot. So to create a textured look using your sewing machine and walking foot, it's all about stitch selection. So I have, on my NV50S here, I have used a serpentine stitch, which means it's a stitch that's slightly wavy and it moves forward. It does create a really, really great effect when you're quilting with it. So this is not for the golden bee, this is just for me to show you how to do it because it was a bit hard to be able to show the markings on black. So I want to tell you what I've done. I've used quilt basting spray to attach my piece of cream fabric and my batting. So I've already done that, I've pre-sprayed that, and I've marked the centre of my, actually I've just marked a line so I can start straight. Now this is not where my needle's going to go, this is where I'm going to keep my foot aligned and you'll see shortly. But I'm going to start stitching and use the walking foot to space the distance between my serpentine. So I'm going to pop this in and start stitching. I have adjusted my serpentine stitch to open it out so it's more elongated and slightly wavy, not really wavy. So I'm going to use my black mark here in the centre of the foot rather than lining that for my needle, and I'm going to start stitching. This is my first row complete, but you can't really see what it's going to look like until I've done several rows, so I'll do another couple. And I'm going to use the side of my foot here to align on the very tip of these serpentine stitches. So I'm just going to start driving. You can start to see the fabrics popping out here in a textural way. I'm going to do one more down this side of the right hand side of the black line and see if we can get the effect. This is a really fun way to quilt some fabric. You can see it's starting to, if I have a look at the back, you can start to see it, it's starting to pop out. Just keep going, keep driving, left and right till it's completely quilted, and you'll be able to make your own textured fabric with your walking foot. So those are the last parts completed for our elements for the bee. I'm going to go now and finish off all my quilting so that we can start on the next step, which will be construction.